Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go.
But before that, there's an announcement that the Quality Improvement Program for the preliminary examination of 2021 have started from Monday, that is today. And these include 50 hours of targeted course of the preliminary examination, and there will be a balance between the core and the current affairs section. And this will help you in having a targeted approach for this year's preliminary examination. The next batch will start from 3rd of May. For more details, look at the link that has been given in the description box below. With this, let's start the discussion now.
Hello and welcome to today's DNS session. We are going to have a discussion on today's newspaper, The Hindu, Delhi edition, dated 18th April 2021. We shall pick up articles important for civil service examination and discuss them as per the demand of the exam. The articles that we are going to take up for discussion are there on your screen, and the timestamping for the same has been provided in the description section. Before you begin taking today's DNS, please take this speed test. Take the test in 2 minutes of a stipulated time. Next on your screen will appear the answer to this test. See what you got right, what you got wrong. For things that you have got wrong, you have to be very attentive and keen when that information will reach to you during the course of DNS. You have to grab them and put it into your long-term memory. This article is from the Science and Tech page of today's newspaper. ARIES facility will host the support center for Aditya L1. ARIES here stands for Aryabhatta Research Institute for Observational Sciences. It is situated near Nainital, but it is coming up with a new center at Haldwani in Uttarakhand, where ARIES will be setting up a data center for Aditya L1. India's first solar program to study the sun and the region between the sun and the earth, Aditya L1, is scheduled to be launched in January next year. Aryabhatta Research Institute for Observational Sciences already has done the groundwork to study the solar corona and other part of the sun. They have developed an algorithm to study the accelerating solar eruptions in the lower corona that is called as coronal mass ejections. They also have developed some image processing algorithms to better study the surface of the sun, the details of which we will not get into. Also, the spectral data that ISRO will get from the Aditya L1 mission that needs to be processed in order to have a better insight. And of course, there is a need to continuously monitor the mission and coordinate the work on various payloads of the mission. So it seems prudent that a specialized body handle these things, and that is why the data center for Aditya L1 mission has been given to ARIES, Aryabhatta Research Institute for Observational Sciences. Now let's see things important for the exam. Let's see some important pointers regarding the Aditya L1 mission. First of all, it is India's first mission to study the sun. It was scheduled to be launched in early 2020, but the aim of the mission has been upgraded, and now the schedule is to launch it in early 2022. Previously, the name was Aditya 1 because the plan was to study only sun's corona. But now the name of the mission is Aditya L1, and the aim of the mission is to study not only sun's corona but also sun's photosphere and chromosphere. Not only these three outer layers of the sun, but also to inquire into solar emissions like solar winds, solar flares, and coronal mass ejections. The Aditya L1 mission will always be facing the sun, carrying out round-the-clock imaging of the sun. You must take special notice of this fact that Aditya L1 will be launched into a point in the space called as L1 Lagrange point. There are 5 Lagrange points in the solar system of ours, and it's like the parking lot of the solar system. Because out of the 5, 2 are stable points. When satellites or telescopes are placed on those stable points, they remain in the orbit revolving around the sun for a long time. There is no orbital decay that the satellite or the space mission is dying into the sun. The 2 of the Lagrange points are stable because the gravitational force are perfectly balanced on those points. Since the mission is to be sent in the Lagrange point, so PSLV, the XL variation of PSLV, that will be used as the launch vehicle. Now there are 2 things that we need to do here, as we have seen that the aim of Aditya L1 mission is to study the 3 outer layers of the sun: corona, chromosphere, photosphere. So one, we will look at the layers of the sun first, and second, we'll also study from the perspective of prelims exam various solar emissions. See, the layers of the sun can be divided broadly into two categories. The inner layers comprising core, radiative zone and convection zone, and the outer layer comprising photosphere, chromosphere, a transition region between chromosphere and corona. The innermost layer of the Earth is the core of the Earth. And it is in this region that the thermonuclear reactions, nuclear fusion inside the sun happens. The temperature inside the core is exorbitantly high, around 15 million degrees Celsius. The core of the sun roughly extends to the quarter of the radius of the sun. Above core, there is a zone called as radiative zone. The energy that has been produced through nuclear fusion that tries to escape the core region and comes out through the process of electromagnetic radiation. And you may be surprised to learn that it takes around 1,70,000 years for this electromagnetic radiation to escape the radiative zone. The radiative zone extends to 70% of the sun's radius. Above radiative zone is convection zone. The energy that the radiative zone has brought above it comes to the convection zone, and now the energy transfer is through the convection. The heated layer above the radiative zone becomes light, goes up, cools down and comes down again. This process of convection brings the energy at the top of the convective zone. The temperature gradually decreases from the core of the sun, where the temperature is around 15 million degrees Celsius, to the convective zone, where the temperature is around 2 million degrees Celsius. These three layers, the core, radiative zone and convection zone, they forms the inner layer of the sun. In the outer layer of the sun, the first layer is photosphere. This layer is visible directly from the earth. It is also called as the surface of the sun or the solar surface. Below photosphere, remember, there is convection zone, and in convection zone, convection is happening, where there are currents of particles in the form of plasma. The lighter one goes up, comes to the surface and then sinks down. But there are some bubbling gases at this layer, and they comes out and they forms photosphere. The sunspots, they are found in the photosphere. The temperature in the photosphere is around 6,500 degree Kelvin. Above photosphere, there is a layer called as chromosphere. This layer of chromosphere and the layer above it has a temperature more than photosphere. And this we have not been able to understand yet as to why this is the case. From photosphere, the temperature increases as you go further away from the sun. Above photosphere, there is a transition region. But in this thin transition zone, the temperature escalates very fast from 8,000 to 5 lakh degree Kelvin. And the reason for this escalation in the transition zone and the reason why temperature is increasing as we go away from the photosphere is not very well known. Sun's outermost layer is corona. It has as such no upper limit because it becomes thinner and thinner, thinner and thinner, and it just merges with the vacuum, just like the ionosphere of Earth. The temperature in the corona is between 5 lakh degree Kelvin to 1 million degree Kelvin. The outermost surface corona is much hotter than the inner surface photosphere. This is one aspect that Aditya L1 will inquire into. You must be aware that NASA's Parker probe is currently probing this very aspect of sun. I must tell you one thing at this juncture, that the outer layer of corona is loose. The magnetic field of the sun, they are open here, and hence the mass ejection is easily possible from the outer layer. And various kind of mass ejection and radiative ejection happens from the layer of corona. Altogether, that you have to remember for the exam, there are 4 kind of ejections that you must know. Recent researchers have shed a lot of light in this kind of ejection, solar energetic particles. You must know about solar winds, solar flares, and coronal mass ejection. Coronal mass ejection, solar flares, and solar winds, these 3 come from the corona. We know it. But from where solar energetic particles emanate, we do not know. But we know it for sure, it is not emanating from corona. First, let's talk about solar flares and solar mass ejections, because they are very closely related. They are related with the entanglement of magnetic field of sun. They both are kind of explosions. Sometimes they occur together, but still they are not the same thing, because they emit different things, radiation or particles. Their size, their form, their shape are different, and they also travel differently in the space. One is directional, one is non-directional. And they have different effect on the atmosphere, the region around the Earth. The origin of both solar flares and solar mass ejection is the contortment, the entanglement of the magnetic field of the sun, the magnetic field going zigzag, cutting crisscross each other. And what happens then, the magnetic field tries to reset itself. To make an analogy, just like the sudden release of a twisted rubber band, the magnetic fields also do an explosive realignment. And that drives lots of mass and energy into the space. When this phenomena of realignment of entangled magnetic field of the sun, when that creates a sudden flash of light, it is called as a solar flare. Now, you must know that the solar flare has X-rays and energy, lots of energy in it. Energy carried mostly by photons, and they travel at the speed of light. Solar flares are non-directional. It goes in all direction in the space. The effect of solar flare is disruption of radio waves. Solar flares can actually completely block the radio waves, disrupting the communication signals completely. Coronal mass ejection, as differed from the solar flare, is giant clouds of particles. They look different. Since they have more particulate composition, they do not travel with the speed of light. It takes around 1 to 3 days for coronal mass ejections to reach to the Earth. Since solar flares travel with the speed of light, they take only 8 minutes. The coronal mass ejections, they can interact with Earth's magnetic field, creating a current that will go down the Earth's pole. The particles that is being carried by the coronal mass ejection, they can sink down the Earth's pole, where they can react with oxygen and nitrogen of the atmosphere and create a phenomena called as aurora. Solar winds, on the other hand, they are not the creation of entanglement and realignment of magnetic field of the sun, but rather they are created because of the expanding nature of the outer layer of the sun, the corona. Corona of the sun is continuously expanding, and as I have told you before, that the magnetic field at the corona, they are open. So the mass ejection is easy. So naturally some of the particle at the outer layer of the sun will be coming out. And that is called as solar wind. The energy of solar wind is considerably less. So the magnetic field of the Earth is potent enough to protect us from the solar wind. The composition of the solar wind is very, very wide. Solar wind has most of the material present in the solar plasma. It has multiple heavy ions and atomic nuclei, for example that of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, neon, magnesium, silicon, sulfur, iron, and various other elements. So composition wise it is very different from solar flares or coronal mass ejection. Composition wise it is also very different from solar energetic particles. It is another kind of ejection coming out from the sun, and they are very high energy particle, very high. The energy can go to the level of giga electron volt. We know about them since 1940s, but we do not understand exactly how they are produced and from which part of the sun they are emanating. Since the energy of the particle is very high, they are danger for life in outer atmosphere. They are danger for our space assets and also for astronauts. The onset of these ejections cannot be predicted because we don't know exactly from where they are coming and what phenomena are producing them. Solar energetic particles contain a different mix of particles than other solar streamings, other solar ejections, as we have talked before, like the solar wind or the coronal mass ejection or the solar flares. Because unlike the solar wind, it has fewer carbon, sulfur, phosphorus ions and other heavy metals. And the energy is very high, and yet it is not mostly photon. For a long time it was thought that these ejections come from the corona because the magnetic field are open-ended at corona. So ejection of particles are easier there. But the fingerprint matching shows that this layer of the sun does not have the composition which is there in solar energetic particles. So it must be coming from somewhere in the interior region of the sun where the magnetic fields are closed. But when the magnetic fields are closed, they very strongly trap the material particles within them. But the fingerprinting, the composition of corona does not match up with it. So now we believe that it must be coming from chromosphere, the layer below from where the solar flares and the coronal mass ejections are erupting. There is an article on page number 7, Jaishankar to visit Abu Dhabi today. Our External Affairs Minister will be visiting Abu Dhabi today. It is dubbed as a bilateral visit. It has been going round in media reports for quite some time that UAE has been brokering some kind of back channel talk, some kind of agreement between India and Pakistan. And recently, UAE has actually accepted that it is playing such a role. UAE's ambassador to the US has said that country is mediating between India and Pakistan to help the neighbors reach a healthy and functional relationship. UAE said that it does not expect the two nations to become best friends, the most favored nations for each other, but it hopes that the two nations reaches to a point where relationship is healthy and functional. The foreign minister has gone to UAE in seemingly a bilateral visit, and it is not clear what kind of talk, if at all, goes on with the Pakistani counterpart. But this is the second time the foreign minister of India and Pakistan would be present in the same country in less than 3 weeks. Towards the end of March, they met in a meeting of Heart of Asia Summit. Heart of Asia Summit is led by Afghanistan and Turkey. It's a regional summit for peace in Afghanistan. UAE facilitating a back channel talk between the two nations is a new thing in India's geostrategic policy. Although Pakistan has welcomed it, but India has so far maintained silence on the issue because it goes against our traditional position of diplomacy with Pakistan. India has always maintained that the issue with Pakistan are of bilateral nature and there is no space for a third party to mediate or intervene. India's relation with Pakistan deteriorated and it was frozen in cold in 2016 because of cross-border firing and infiltration issues. Then in 2019, Pulwama terror attack brought the relationship to a lowest ebb. This was followed by Balakot airstrike, retaliation from Pakistan, and then capture of Indian pilot Abhinandan, but soon Pakistan was forced diplomatically to release him. Then in August 2019, after India revoked the special status of state of Jammu and Kashmir under Article 370 and bifurcated the state into two UTs, Pakistan downgraded its diplomatic ties, forcing India to do the same. And all these also led to snapping of trade ties, bringing the diplomatic relation between the two nations to a lowest low. But however, opening of Kartarpur corridor between the two nations was a positive development in the bilateral relation. To a certain extent, it helped in minimizing the trust deficit, leading the two nations to move towards enhancing trade cooperation. There have been some recent positive development that you must be aware of between the two nations. First of all, the militaries of India and Pakistan announced that they will be adhering to the ceasefire agreements that the two nations had before, the latest one in 2003, along the line of control. This, according to some media reports, has been possible because of back channel talks that has been already going on 3 months before this announcement was made in the month of February. Prime Minister of India wished the Prime Minister of Pakistan on their National Day on March 23rd, and they exchanged few messages, which was a positive sign, a sign of beginning of dialogue between the two nations. In March, the Indus Water Treaty talks was also revived that has been on hold for 2 years. And then there has been demand by Pakistani importers for cotton and sugar from India. And it seemed like both the nations were moving on with better trade ties, but then Pakistan started to flip-flop over their trade decisions. Now let's talk about UAE. What is UAE's role in the geostrategy of region and internationally as a peace broker? UAE is a nation that has developed lots of diplomatic power recently. It has quite shifted away from military might, military projection, effort to develop military power towards diplomacy, investment, people-to-people contact, and other soft powers. UAE was the prime mover in the last year's Abraham Accord between Israel, beginning with UAE, then Bahrain, then Sudan, then Morocco. UAE diplomats, along with Saudi counterparts, they have played crucial role in mediating the 2018 peace deal between Ethiopia and Eritrea. The UAE's credential as a peace broker has also been enhanced by its decision to reduce its footprints in Yemen. UAE is pulling out its forces from Yemen and Horn of Africa. It is also looking to scale back its operation in Libya. UAE is now looking for a political solution in this war-torn region. UAE is also seriously considering reducing the tension with Iran and between Iran and Arab nations. UAE is also making sincere effort to re-engage with the Bashar al-Assad regime of Syria, with whom they were once at loggerheads. UAE has a stand that war in the region has effectively ended, and the only way to advance UAE's interests is through political, diplomatic, and commercial means. UAE is a nation that is punching above its weight, meaning it's playing a role that is much bigger for a nation of its size and the traditional roles that it has played in the region. Now UAE has taken a new project of smoothing relation between India and Pakistan. And UAE is well placed for this role because the nation has a strong trade and commercial ties with both the nation, India and Pakistan. And it is also home to millions of Indians and Pakistanis expatriate workers. So it is uniquely qualified to get into this role. As per the media reports, UAE presently is hoping to restore the trade links between the two nations. But it also has aspiration of solving a larger problem between the two nations of developing an understanding on Kashmir. Well, this seems to be a very ambitious goal if UAE has set it for itself, and whether UAE will be able to reach even close to this, that will be tested how well UAE fulfills or reaches to its first goal of developing a smooth trade ties between the two nations. The trade utilization between India and Pakistan is very low. As per the 2018-19 data of World Bank, Pakistan's export to India accounts only for 2% of its total export and only 3% of its total import. And India's export to Pakistan was only 0.63% of its total export and import from Pakistan only 0.1%. This is pathetically low. World Bank has released a report in 2018 and it has talked about India-Pakistan trade potential. The trade between the two nations is of the tune of $2 billion. The potential as per the World Bank is of 37 billion US dollars. But then that will require removing tariff and non-tariff barriers. And this may be too long a way to be taken by both the nations. You must be aware for your prelims examination that Pakistan's export to India primarily includes vegetable products, textiles, dry dates, rock salts, cement. 31% of Pakistan's cement production is exported to India. Pakistan also has some strength in surgical instruments. They also send leather, carpets, and gypsum to India. India's primary export to Pakistan is cotton. Organic chemicals, dyes, and pigments, they are in huge demand in Pakistan. And of course, India sends machineries, pharmaceutical items, tea and spices, iron and steel, and plastic goods. Because the direct trade is too low between the two nations, smuggling happens. The traders first send the item to a third country like Thailand or UAE or Singapore, and from there the goods are sent to India and Pakistan. You must question, what is there for UAE in all this? See, the South Asian initiative of UAE is in sync with UAE's larger foreign policy objective. And what is that? That is to deepen the partnership with US. So what UAE is doing is effectively paralleling America's effort to resolve the conflict in Afghanistan. Americans now want to pull out of Afghanistan, and in Afghanistan, India and Pakistan have competing economic and strategic interests. So resolving conflict between India and Pakistan will help in an easy exit of United States from Afghanistan, and that will bring UAE close to US. They will be supporting each other in their foreign policy interests. Apart from that, you know that UAE has strong ties with both India and Pakistan. So a friendly relation between its allies would be desirable to UAE. There is an article on FAQ page of today's newspaper. What has happened is Supreme Court of United States of America has given a judgment in favor of Google. The case was regarding acquisition coming from Oracle of Google violating the country's copyright law. The case is also dubbed as the copyright case of the century because the implication of the judgment will be far and wide. See, there's a programming platform of Java, and Java Standard Edition, this was created by Sun Microsystems. Oracle acquired this Java language from the Sun Microsystem. But then it was discovered that Google has used some 11,500 lines from the code of Java that was developed by Sun Microsystem, which was acquired by Oracle. In 2010, Federal District Court ruled in favor of Oracle, saying that Google's Android platform has violated the copyright legal jurisprudence of the country. See, Java is a similar kind of programming as the programming used in Android. So Google very conveniently used some of the codes of Java in its own programming platform of Android. Now the thing is, the Supreme Court of United States has ruled in favor of Google. So there must be some very strong reason for that. Supreme Court has vindicated Google using a doctrine called as fair use of copyrights. Fair use is a legal doctrine that promotes the freedom of expression by permitting unlicensed use of some of the copyright protected materials in certain circumstances. That circumstances could be criticism, comment, news, reporting, teaching for the purpose of scholarship and research. But these traditional criteria as such does not fit into the Google's use of Java's code. But then the argument of Supreme Court of United States is that Google's copying was transformative. It transformed the entire coding world and as such the IT industry. It empowered the coders to code a program that will work on any platform, any device that use Android because it's an open programming platform. And also Google only copied what was needed to allow programmers to work in a different computing environment which was Android, but using the familiar programming language which was Java. The implication of this judgment, Supreme Court giving its judgment in favor of Google, will be very high. First of all, it will set up precedents for courts of other nations also using this doctrine of fair use of copyrights. Second of all, it will empower the coders and IT sector companies to use the codes in a controlled manner. But you must remember, even after the judgment, you cannot use creative codes. Use of creative codes by somebody else will still be infringement of the copyright laws. But you can use a part of code for larger benefit of society if it is a transformative step. Now we have come to the end of the DNS session. Answer to yesterday's question of the day is there on your screen, and today's question of the day is also there. Please attempt the question, post your answer in the comment section, and also attempt the DNS quiz on our ELEARN platform.